Schewe has the most professional looking background.
Right, and beautifully lit. Yeah.
Done in
imagine,
Photoshop.
imagine what it would look like if he weren't beautifully lit. You know. But he's got it going on.
We're sort of getting back into the groove, aren't we?
Yes.
He never got out of it.
This is what I wanted out of these.
You don't get to play the track often enough.
Jeff Schewe, are you going to tell some stories?
You're muted, dude.
It's a good way to keep them.
Well, I don't want to
There we
take
go.
away from Seth's moment in the spotlight.
Just a moment.
But
I will.
Of course you will.
But I'll save it for the end. But I do have one thing, John. I do have a video that we produced on the day that Lightroom shipped, February 19th.
I remember that video. I got that.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, it really does give a an understanding of what the gang of us we used to do down in Antarctica, which is just drink and shoot and drink and shoot and occasionally sleep, and then drink and shoot and drink and shoot.
What's going on with your forehead?
Oh, this?
Yeah.
I did this for Seth. Just a little biopsy.
Okay.
Either that or I headbutted the wrong person. No,
Okay.
so I can take it off, but then you get to see the
Back of your head.
stuff. Yeah, you get to see the inside of my empty head. Thanks.
Okay. Well, hello and welcome to another of my series of conversations. My name is John Cornicello. I'm going live on Mondays and Thursdays at 10 Pacific and 1 Eastern. On Monday, the 24th, my guest will be John Paul Caponegro. On Thursday, the 27th, Drew Hendricks will be here from Red River Paper to answer all your questions about inkjet printing. Today, my guest is photographer, artist, and educator Seth Resnick. I'm going to turn it over to Seth to tell you a bit about himself and his projects. So please welcome Seth.
Hello.
Hello, you're on.
Nice to see everybody here. All these old faces. Definitely old. So, you know, this has been a crazy year for, in a lot of ways. And normally I do a lot of traveling with JP, and we haven't put too many miles on this year.
Oh, we got to Antarctica.
And well, we did get to Antarctica, and it's not looking like so good for even next year. But it's given me a lot of time to think and to write and to dive more into not what the images are of, but something that JP and I always try to teach is about what they're about. And it's been really amazing to sit here for 3 months and go back through images all the way to the beginning and try to find what the actual connection was that ties everything together. And although that may seem like an easy thing, it's taken me 40-something years to figure it out, and I'm still probably only about 60% there. But I came up with a word called Clairsentience, and as a kid, everyone always said that I have ESP, and there were lots of things like looking at a picture one day at age 3 on the wall that had been there for 20 years and telling my mom that she needs to move it because it's going to fall, and they come home from work and the picture's smashed on the ground. And I mean, things like that over and over and over again. And watching JP in particular and watching JP shoot a rock. And for a long time, I'd look at it and go, it's a rock. Very few people I know can set up a relationship with a stone. JP does a great job of it. And it made me think more about what are these images really about? How come I take a picture of a rock and it looks like a picture of a rock? and JP takes a picture of a rock, and it's looks like something completely different. And as a kid, one of my mentors was Pete Turner, and Pete had a fantastic picture of a garbage can, a yellow garbage can.
Yes, with the red top.
Exactly.
I know
And
exactly what you're talking about.
And the picture is like so simple and so blow away. And for years, I would try to like make that image. And I literally would find the same exact can, and mine looked like a fucking garbage can.
Exactly.
And his was awesome. And it's really made me think more and more about this concept of what the images are about, not so much about what they're of. And I realized that I feel when I shoot, I know when I make an image, it's going to work. I mean, I literally have a feeling, and I can shoot 1,000 images, but there's one that I'll remember and I go back to right away as soon as I'm looking at the edit. And it made me realize that what I'm really photographing is energy, and it's a connection. It's almost a spiritual connection between myself and whatever is I'm photographing. And, you know, people always ask, what do I photograph? And it's probably the hardest thing to answer because unlike a lot of people, I'm not like a fashion photographer, I'm not a wildlife photographer, but I've done all those things. But what I really photograph is this invisible, sort of an invisible connection that I feel with the subject. And it's taken a good 40 years to start to unwind that. The word part is really, really amazing. I make a list of words that I keep on my desktop. I call them emotional keywords. And really fascinating to go through those words and then go back and look at the images I really like and see how many of those words are actually in or relevant with those particular images. And it's gone to a point where I actually keep those words in my head when I go out and shoot, and I try to shoot those words. I do a lot of stuff at night where I wake up, I still keep my iPhone with me, and I'll have a dream and I'll just write down something about the dream, and then we'll go out the next day and try to photograph the feelings, the concepts of the dream. And what I realized is the dream, the entire process of dreaming is sort of like what it is like for me to photograph. It's this other reality that very private. I'm always fascinated when someone's standing next to me and they go, what are you shooting? I'm like, that. And that is, to me, something amazing, but they can't see it. Really, I mean, it's a really fascinating process. It sounds crazy. You know, I sound like a fruitcake from somewhere in Arizona, but the more and more I experience it, the more I realize that the images that are really, really important to me are these ones that have this connection to a sense of energy. And, you know, I think I picked up a lot of it from my dear nut friend, JP. We do a lot of talking, and it's a really fascinating process. Also looking at the difference between style and vision, and I think so many photographers actually can't explain what they do. I'm a still life photographer. That doesn't say anything. I'm a wildlife photographer, doesn't really say anything. And understanding what your vision really is about, and then what is the style that you use is another really fascinating process that I think I've had a lot more time to explore recently.
Mm-hmm.
So
you mentioned process in there. Do you find your photography being more of a product or a process?
I find the photography part to be almost like a language.
Mm-hmm.
The process is a mental process. I mean, getting into the mindset of feeling what's there, what I really want to explore, why am I here? And I make a lot of notes ahead of time. And with each of our trips to Antarctica, I'll spend months ahead of time going through images and seeing what the connection is, and then trying to make a list of what it is that I want to capture in the next trip. And a lot of people have a trouble with that because they go, how do you know what you want to capture if you haven't been there yet? I mean, or the trip hasn't happened. And, you know, I understand that, but it's really, for me, it's really, really worthwhile to look at what's cohesive in a body of work, and then actually spend more time looking at what's missing in that body of work, and what I need to make it more cohesive.
So how did you and JP hook up with each other and team up?
So interesting story. Well, there's this guy that's on the screen next to JP right now named Mueller, who got a lot of us together. And I think
Pronounce it right. It's Nula.
Nula. And I think we really hit it off. It was at a photo expo, of course, having wine, actually having sake. And we started, there were a whole group of explorers there, and the topic.
Jeff was there.
What's that?
Jeff was there.
Jeff was there, yes. And we started talking about business. And I sort of sat back and listened and got very frustrated and sort of let loose on everybody about copyright and the value of an image over your lifetime, how you can't put a single price on it. And I probably spent about 10 minutes just going off, and I look over and JP sort of looks at me and does the thing with his finger and says, we gotta talk some more. And that was it. I'd already known Jeff. Jeff and I don't even know where you and I met, Jeff.
You were president of EP and I was president of APA.
Yeah, but I met you before then, didn't I?
Huh.
I think that same conversation was the moment that Jeff decided I was not a flake, because he turns to me and says, so JP, you know, artists, they're not very good businessmen. And I just go off, talk about contracts, and the rest of it says, huh. When you can end a conversation with Mr. Schewe with a, huh. You've done something. Anyway, that was a fantastic conversation, and the respect. One of the things I really loved about what you did was you're standing up for other artists. You were helping other artists through EP, other things. Mueller was helping facilitate some of that conversation at the table. He got it going. You know, it's a community.
So what is EP?
We need to help each other.
EP was editorial photographers, and it started as a movement of about 10 of us that were all working for Business Week, and we had tried for years to try to get them to raise their day rate, and it was like up against a stone wall. So we sort of decided that we weren't going to be available on any time they called. And they only used a small group of people to do covers. And amazingly, we were all unavailable. And that little movement grew to negotiating sessions in New York with their legal team and Time Magazine's legal team and Forbes legal team. And we changed the industry. I mean, it was really amazing. And the group got to be, I think at one point we had 5,500 members worldwide. And it was refreshing and really amazing to take no pay, spend all my own money, but for the right reasons, and see a real change in the industry. Those sort of were the days.
Yeah. So let's go back a little further. Where did you grow up?
He never grew up.
Never. Well, that's a Jay Maisel that we've all reached this age without reaching maturity, but I think Seth froze up there. Did we lose you, Seth?
I said,
We lost you for a few minutes there.
It says I'm unstable again. Oh.
Zoom knows.
So from upstate New York, I went to Syracuse and went to school at Syracuse University, and then stayed on there. I got offered a job at the newspaper there, which was really an amazing opportunity. And I worked on a story that I worked on for many, many years. And eventually got bored. And it's funny, photography became a formula, and it was winning these NPPA competitions. And it was relatively easy to go out and make an image that you knew would win. And after winning time and time again, I just got bored because they were sort of meaningless images. You were shooting for like a contest.
Right.
So I gave it all up and started doing magazine work. And that went on for a long time. I don't know how many, I mean, I have drawers and drawers of covers from everything from New York Times, Sunday Magazine to Time and Ink, Newsweek, on and on and on. But again, that became like a formula. And got bored with it, and then went to advertising, which was back in the day a ton of fun, and a lot of annual reports when companies had money. So doing things like flying in corporate jets and starting with Mueller. Those were the days when Canon, we would go out to these, I mean, it's beyond embarrassing, our dinners, but I remember a dinner at Montrachet in New York where I think the wine bill was around $12,000. It was very good.
It was what it was.
It was a different, it was a different time period. And then eventually I got bored with that, and decided I need to shoot for the best client, which is me.
Yeah.
And it was the only way that I was going to really grow. But it's hard to say no to paying jobs and figure out a way to earn an income and still shoot and do everything for yourself. So JP and I started Digital Photo Destinations, and that was, it still is, although we're not traveling right now, was a really fantastic opportunity to go to these different locations with a small group of people. I love teaching, and combine the teaching with the whole idea of also being able to shoot in these amazing, amazing locations, and to really work on making images for me, which is ultimately what is, for me, was the most important. And then finding
So how do you distinguish between workshops and tours?
We don't do tours.
Okay, that's
number one. We do not take people to a location and say, this is the famous tree, and it's a 28mm shot or a 14 and blah, blah, blah. We take people to locations and say, so how does this location talk to you? And how do you make this your own? How do you make a Seth picture, a JP picture? I don't want anyone making Seth pictures. I want them to make their own images, ones that are important to them. And we did one trip to Antarctica with a lot of people, and we both now know that we'll never do something like that again. I think, for us, 18 people, 14 to 18 people, somewhere in there is a really, really good number where you really have time to do one-on-one, a lot of one-on-one stuff, and really watch people develop. And really neat for us to see that. I'd say, I don't know what the exact number is, but I'm going to venture to say it's about 70% of the people that have traveled with us multiple times. And that's really neat to see someone actually grow visually and emotionally.
5 or 6 of them are here right now. There's Keith, there's Janet, there's Tim, there's Marcella, there's Paul.
Nice.
Les.
And that's really, really rewarding. And also, the technology part, back in the day, I mean, when we formed Pixel Genius, I think that was probably the most bizarre corporate.
See if Jeff wants to weigh in on that one.
That has ever happened, because I mean, there were a whole group of us who were friends. Bruce Frazier, God bless him.
Yes.
Martin Evening, Andrew Rodney, Jeff, and I, and we knew we wanted to do something, and we literally sat in Jeff's studio. Several of those guys smoked cigarettes. Bruce I mean, the air was so thick that I mean, it was intolerable. And we decided we were going to form a company. So like most companies that would sell stock, we each put in $500, was it, Jeff? $300? We went to the wine store.
Yeah, it was $500, and between the five of us, and then our first big corporate purchase, of course, was to go down to the wine store, and someday, John, you'll have to have the remaining Pixel members together on a conversation, because we have some interesting, funny stories and some funny pictures. But yeah, I mean, you're not supposed to go into business with your friends, and we did.
Mhm.
You're not supposed to.
You're supposed to have a business plan.
Our business plan was to have fun. So, we ended up having a great deal of fun and doing a lot of stuff. Our first product, that was the other thing. Our first product actually was something we gave away for free. It was called MetaReader, and at the time, Photoshop couldn't read the metadata, and we had stuff embedded in metadata, and Photoshop couldn't read it. So we came up with our first plugin was a thing called MetaReader that allowed us to read the metadata that was in the file. And then we also advocated very strongly for photographers' rights and positions regarding Adobe. And what Seth will talk about, hopefully, is his introduction to being a Photoshop alpha tester. Well, I mean, alpha testing is a bizarre thing in that you've got the engineers, the people making decisions, coming to us to say, I'm thinking about doing something like this. What do you think? And then we're in a position of leading them in the right direction before stuff is even engineered. And Seth and Martin and I and Katrine Eisman, JP always avoided the whole alpha testing, although he would be willing.
He was
to
behind the scenes.
Well, I'm
He
not
didn't
sure
like
why.
the controversy that we enjoyed.
But one of the things that we ended up doing was sticking up for photographers' rights in the major technology of the day, which was Photoshop, and pushing gently where possible, and sometimes having a fucking tantrum to get things done properly. And I remember sitting around a big meeting in New York City where I was there, Jack Resnick was there, who was president of PPA, Seth,
when we
president
killed the
of
product.
PP. And we're basically telling people, if you do this, you're gonna injure photographers. And of course they went ahead and did it, but then they decided a couple of years down the road that they really did screw the pooch and undid it. So yeah, I mean, Seth had a lot of influence in the industry, as well as Jack and I, and trying to kind of guide the industry in the direction it should go. And we tried doing that with Canon, with Nuller. I'm not saying we got Nuller fired, but I think we got Nuller fired.
I did that myself.
Nuller doesn't learn, but we certainly helped get you fired.
Yeah, there's a question coming up in the chat that takes us in a different direction, though, from Jorge or George. A question related to being a climate activist and a challenge about communicating the impacts of melting glaciers. Is that?
Yeah. Hi, guys. Hi,
How you
Seth.
doing? How you doing?
I just figured out why you haven't gone out to have a beer with me. It's a wine thing, not a beer thing.
No, wine, beer, it's all good.
All right, good. So listen, yeah, my question really is totally
You
off.
got a copy of your book there to hold up?
Oh, no, I don't. Sorry. No, he's referring to the fact that I work on glaciers, and that's how I was attracted to Seth's work. I'm just a passionate person about glaciers. I wrote a book called Glaciers, the Politics of Ice. I'm an environmentalist and a Creo activist.
Read the book.
Oh, okay. So my question, and one of the challenges we have, I work a lot on climate policy and the Paris Agreement, all this stuff, and one of the hard things that we have to do is to communicate to people the vulnerability of ice and glaciers and the melting polar ice caps. And, you do this visually and artistically so well. I wonder how you think about the challenges, or if you, factor that in, of communicating something that's so intangible to people. Most people, 99.9% of people, won't ever see where you go. And just like in my own activism, it's really hard to communicate all these vulnerabilities to people who just don't see it. They don't see sea level rise. They don't see the melting glaciers. I was just watching a documentary on CNN the other day. Louisiana is getting sea level rise, and people there don't believe that it's because of the melting glaciers. How do you factor in environment and activism and your message, if at all?
That's a great question, and several ways. The overall message of my work is a concept of being aware of this amazing environment and going to all these places with an idea of raising the consciousness of everyone to pay more attention to it. It's also a conflict when you photograph a piece of ice, for example, and you look at it and it's so beautiful. And one of the things I wonder is if people only look at it as beauty, do they actually miss the point, or am I missing the point of conveying? And for me, I have to photograph what I'm attracted to, and I have to photograph that energy. But it is something that I'm very conscious of. When someone looks and goes, "Oh, that's so amazing! It's so beautiful," and then you at least have a chance to say, "Yeah," and it's disappearing. It's disappearing quicker than we've ever seen. Education is the answer to everything. So, if I can get someone interested enough to even look at a topic a little more, or look at a location a little more, and understand what some of the problems are and the issues are in that location, then that helps. But it is a conflict in making these really beautiful images, and also making sure that the message gets across correctly.
That are doing the activism, and maybe trying to build those bridges more between the photographer and the policy people, or the photographer and the authors of the media that works on climate change. That's a big need.
The opportunities that we've had are, I wouldn't trade a lifetime for. And I think one of the moments that right on this topic was we were on a boat in Greenland, and they wanted a local politician to come on the boat. And most people were like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. Like, the last thing we need when we're photographing ice is some, nonsense guy from some little town in Greenland." And, he comes on and does his little spiel, very political. And then I asked him, I said, "So, I know you guys want to secede from Denmark, and, gee, that means you need an economy, and I assume it's fishing." And he looks at us and says, "Oh, no, fishing here is horrible. There's only fish on one side of Greenland. The other side doesn't have fish. It's, it's mineral exploration." And it's sort of like laughing. I'm like, "Yeah, the only problem is you have this little thing of 3,000 meters of ice on top of all that." He takes out a video and shows how they've, and this was right at the point where in the US we were first hearing about Greenland melting. And he proceeds to show a video how they've tapped into some natural hot springs, and they're pumping that hot water up on top of the glacier to melt it to get to all the oil, gas, gold, and everything else. And of course, in the background, you see all these American companies are behind them, Exxon and all that. Those types of moments are really amazing to have the experience to go to some of these locations firsthand, going to Antarctica and talking to some of the scientists firsthand, and getting a really different perspective of what we are fed in the media, which a lot of times actually doesn't get it right. Really is a fantastic part of it. And I guess trying to get that conveyed in a bigger picture is.
So maybe just as a last thought, I don't want to keep you guys on this topic, but we can certainly, or I can certainly help any of you guys identify some people you might want to invite, and not someone like that politician, but maybe someone working at the Ford Foundation on climate change that would really benefit from the places you go and the things you see that so few people get to actually see firsthand.
That'd be great.
Can you mention the name of your book again?
Sorry, the book was called Glaciers, The Politics of Ice. And it's basically the book is an introduction to glaciers, but it tells a story of the very first glacier protection law that was passed. And one of the most incredible statistics, and I'll leave that.
It's a fantastic book.
The 98% of the world's water is salt water, 2% is fresh water. 3/4 of that is.
You froze up.
Oh, that's neat.
First.
Yeah, you're breaking up, George.
So it was a big fight. I had to leave Argentina because we got too many death threats at one point.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
Jorge,
go
and I
back
don't
to-
want to dominate this conversation, but I could weigh in a ton on all of that. Come back next Monday and let's talk a little bit
Okay.
about that.
Same thing happened to me at Canon. Too many.
One of the
death threats.
things that Seth could point out is, particularly photographically, in Antarctica, we've gone to the same place multiple times, spread out over years, and it's shocking to see. I mean, places where we went the first time and we saw Glacier Cabin,
Paradise Bay.
yeah, and Nico Harbor, and we go back and then we see shoreline, and the expedition crew also are real advocates for environmental protection. But then just going down to see islands that normally would have penguins nesting in snow and having them just nesting on rocks because there's no snow. We've seen a lot of change, and Seth is all about the interesting picture, but he's got a journalist background as well. And I think if we went back and edited for the purposes of discovering just how bad it's gotten down there, we might be able to put together an interesting show of, yeah, this shit is real. You know, the sea ice is diminishing. The great big huge chunks like the size of Manhattan are breaking off at greatly increased rates. And, you know, it's terrible what we're doing to the earth.
On our last trip we encountered, how big was that in JP? 15 miles long?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
massive,
big enough.
massive.
Shimi, let me just jump in real quickly. We've been losing this battle for a long time. I watched Ansel Adams lose the fight. I watched Elliot Porter lose the fight. We're continuing to lose the fight, and it's because we're having the same kind of conversation. We've got to change the kinds of conversation we're having around this. The individual photographers telling the same old advocacy story in the same old ways are going to fail again, and we can't afford to fail at this point. So we need creative individuals to come up with really creative solutions about delivering this message. Just as an aside, scientists are realizing they need to get more creative with messaging it. One of my friends is Paul Majewski, who's the head of the Greenland Ice Sheet Project. He's one of the big guys on all this ice core sampling, one of the pioneers. He rewrote his book because he realized it was too scientific and he just didn't reach the populace. So we told it as a personal adventure story and released it as an ebook on Apple Books and got more exposure that way. So it's really interesting to hear how scientists are thinking about how they tell their stories. And we've actually been talking a lot over a number of years about collaborating. We've presented together before, and we're going to present some other things. I'm not saying that we found all the answers. I'm saying I think we all need a very creative mindset. We need to try a lot of different things in a lot of different channels. And again, stop having the same conversation. Because if we're still stuck on proving whether it exists, and look, Seth and my images, your images, they're not going to prove it like satellite imagery and the data that these guys assembled does. If we're still stuck on does it exist or not, it's too late. We have to fundamentally change the way that people relate to nature so that it's a matter of our own vested personal interest to make these changes, not a competing interest.
I think that one of the issues that's driving all this yin and yang is the fact that we photographers create or try to create beautiful images, and the majority of the general public loves to look at beautiful images. Scientists write things in such terminology that it bores 92% or 95% of the people. The collaboration that you're really talking about is to get a group of photographers, creative photographers, including you, JP. That flew over his head, but anyway.
Be at the back.
A group of creative,
sure.
Get a group of creative photographers to make beautiful images of the ice, the icebergs, the penguins, the
Narwhals, yeah.
Narwhal.
And collaborate with the scientists that will say, yes, it's beautiful, but in 2 years, in 1 year, in 10 years, it's going to be gone. And don't write about it in terms of really technical language. You can do the same thing for any of the areas, like the rainforests.
I'm saying, Nuala, that's already been done and that failed. Having gone down to Al Gore's climate leadership core training in Atlanta.
How long ago?
How long ago? Let's talk 1970s. Let's talk 1960s. Let's talk every single decade.
2020, things have changed.
Well, I understand, but I think Paul Nicklin is doing a great job with Christina Mittermeier advocating for the sea in traditional ways. And she's a terrific woman to look at in terms of environmental advocacy. I mean, started the International League of Conservation Photographers and their raves and that whole thing. I think she's terrific to look at those kinds
Well, what
of
happens if governments get involved in all this?
How long is it going to take, and how long an attention span does the United States have when you're dealing with issues that last hundreds and even thousands of years? And every administration is going to do it. Look what's going on with every environmental law and act that has happened in this country right now in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Those changes.
Well, that's an anomaly.
Those changes have to happen with business people like Paul Hawkins, who helps write Drawdown and gets together with other business leaders and gets around the governments into industry. These changes have to happen with individuals on the ground.
I think
So I want to highlight one last thing, and then I'm going to shut up. There was a little 8-year-old girl who did this beautiful little video. She read a poem about her experience with climate change as an 8-year-old. And she stole the show from Al Gore during his climate leadership conference. Gore was getting up there showing us how to make the 10-minute video. He's recently been influenced by Reverend Barber, and he's preaching a little bit. But this girl, in her simple testimony, is just this little girl who we hope has the future that we all hope for her and that she hopes for, somehow got a hold of heartstrings in a way that a lot of that, what is it called, victim fatigue? All the advocacy out there that, we see a lot of it and we get numb to it, and all those beautiful pictures, and yeah, it's vanishing, but my income or the next tax break is more important. Somehow she just cut right through that. And it had to do with her being thoroughly authentic and an individual telling her story. We need more individuals telling their story passionately in lots of different ways. And it could be music, it could be poetry, it can be all kinds of things, but it needs to be this swell.
Yeah, but maybe we ought to think about cherry picking the type of people in big business that we can pony up with, like
Yes.
Elon Musk. Right? Elon Musk, he wants electric cars, all right, which
Yeah.
is totally against oil and coal or whatever the current administration wants to bring back.
That's right.
And he's ponied up with NASA. NASA certainly wants to protect this small blue planet.
Yeah, but the real sleeper with Musk is where he's developing battery technology, because right now per gigawatt or kilowatt of energy, green sources are actually cheaper. But the problem is they're not as consistent, and you need the battery technology to get that infrastructure in place.
You guys,
But now you're talking about money.
you
And if you don't have money, if you don't have business in this, you're going to lose the battle.
we can bring this maybe back to photography. What I wanted to leave you guys with is the challenge, and I think you've said it, is the challenge of breaking out of our silos, understanding where we are, finding stories which are incredibly effective, but really making an effort in your own photography to make it move beyond a visual appeal, right? And that's a challenge. And I think we all need to think about the youth and people like Greta and their message and how we can use it. How do we use TikTok? That's the new way of communicating of so many people, and we're not thinking about it. And just watching the Democratic Convention, so many few young people on there, and we need a new approach. And maybe photographers who are experienced like yourselves can help make that bridge of your art and your work to the needs that we have today in our society to address the things that you're photographing.
You're here.
Great.
To go back to where we started.
Yeah.
Part of that is understanding what your vision is. And, you know, I'm amazed at how many well-respected colleagues can actually concisely tell you what their images are about. They can tell you what they're of, but not what they're about. And part of dealing with this whole concept of how do we push more environmental awareness, I think it has to start, at least from a photographer standpoint, it has to start with you actually understanding what your vision is and how to convey that vision, both visually and along with if words are needed or not needed, to make a point other than just a group of pretty pictures. You know, I'm a photographer. Well, so is everyone else in the world, literally. And I would, you know, I think it's something that most, actually go beyond photographers, most artists actually can't really tell you what their work's about. I would say painters probably can do a better job than photographers, but it's a really important part of allowing you to grow as an artist, I think, is to really learn and understand what your work is really about. Really easy to know what it's of. Really difficult to really figure out what it's about. But once you understand what it's about, then you at least have a chance of conveying what it's really about to others. And I think that's a key answer in all of this. Do I sound like JP?
So I realize you've gone from photojournalism to commercial to abstract art. I mean, are you doing any commercial work these days, or is it all for you now?
I haven't, I'm proud to say I haven't accepted a paying job in about 6 or 7 years.
Nice.
And it's really good. I think my work has grown more in the last 2 years than ever before. And part of that is not having to worry about where that check's going to come from, and really being able to ask myself those important questions of, why are you doing this? I mean, there's so many things I do and so many things I could do. Why photography? You know, and what's it really about and why? And it's been a really interesting question to pursue personally, and realize the importance of it. You know, I have conversations with myself. I lay down on my own couch and talk to myself. But it's a really important part. I think for everyone to grow as an artist, really learning and understanding what your work is really about, how it affects not only you, how it affects others. Is it affecting others the way you want it to? How do you do a better job of making that happen? What belongs, what doesn't belong? A really fascinating process.
Yeah. How do you start that introspection for someone who's never really thought about it?
Take a group of images and see how they relate and how they don't relate, which ones relate. I think one of the scariest things and one of the funniest things that anyone ever said to me about this whole business is Jay Maisel. And you know, he's such a character, but we're talking one day and we're talking about how photographers can, if they work really hard, they can put together like 10 portfolio images. They can easily put together maybe 15. But once you go beyond that, it starts getting tougher and tougher to get a big number. It's kind of amazing that all these years of doing this, you come down to still a very small group of images that really, really communicate what you know what it's all about. And then he says, you know, I am better than most, and I have probably several thousand images. And then says, and my shutter speed's typically 1/500th of a second. So that means my entire life's work I've done in about 2 seconds. The rest of it's just been a fucking waste. And while he doesn't mean it literally, it is really fascinating to look at how we're taking these moments in time and, you know, capturing the small moment in time, and in the big picture, how small that is in the amount of time it takes to go out and do all this. And really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, think back to when we were shooting 4x5, 8x10, you know, with artists, photographers, artists would say, you know, in a year, 5 great images. You know, now since 35 millimeter film and now into digital, I mean, people think they need 5 images, great images a week to stay on social media. It's just crazy what we do to ourselves.
I think the editing process is something that a lot of people have forgotten how to do. And I think that was actually a real benefit of film. Back in the magazine days, shooting Kodachrome and, you know, running to the lab and getting those rolls of Kodachrome. And I probably shot 20 to 50 rolls on the job, but laying them out on a light table and then realizing that, you know, there's not an editor in the world that's going to go look through 50 boxes of Kodachrome. They didn't have the time. And you would make, typically I would make a page of selects. I would mark with a little red Sharpie the ones I really liked. They never used those. And then 3 or 4 other pages of 20. And editors thought me like, oh my God, you've given us so much selection. This is amazing. You look at that number, it was like 100. Ask a photographer today who's shooting digital, show me your 20 best, show me 100. They look at, you know, I was just in Antartica, I got 7,500 images. Well, that's great. 7,400 of them suck. Learn how to go through them and really find the ones that are worth something. I think one of the problems with digital is we generate so much data by the very nature of it that we actually don't have a chance to go through and hone in on what the important data is. Very easy to collect gigabytes of information. But you know, one of the things about slides is you had that page of 20, or you had my reel on my Leica projector of my 60 favorite images. A lot of people don't have it. They've actually never taken the time to go through even one shoot and really narrow down on what was really important from that shoot. It's like, let me show you Antarctica. I don't want to see Antarctica. I want to see what your story is. I know what Antarctica is, but what's your story in Antarctica? Well, I haven't had time to do that. I've got 75,000 images. Well, take the time and edit. I mean, it's really important.
Yeah. Is that a workshop you have on how to edit, or something maybe you could develop?
All of our field workshops, we spend a lot of time on editing, and in our D65 workshops, we spend a lot of time on maintaining and managing the library. We still do a lot of consulting.
What was the name of the video that you did with Michael Reichman? Where the fuck are my pictures?
Where the bleep are my pictures?
Oh yeah, sorry.
And that's true. I mean, a lot of people lose, you know, the library skills are needed. The unfortunate part about most of these cameras and most of the software is you can pick up any of these cameras and just start using it. You can pick up all this software and start using it without really understanding how it really works. And I know, Jeff, I know you wanted me to tell a story, but back in the days of being on the Alpha team with Photoshop, you know, Photoshop is a mind-boggling program that's beyond enormous. And and you know, I'm always amazed at people that say I'm a Photoshop expert. And it's like, that's my first sign that they don't know a fucking thing about Photoshop. But we were at this meeting, and you know, it's all these all these Photoshop geniuses, like, God forbid I say, but like Jeff Schewe. And after being on the Alpha team, we went around and said, so how do you now feel about Photoshop? And my mistake, probably 25 years ago, I said this, Jeff will never let me live it down. But I said, now that I've done all this Photoshop work, I feel like a kid in diapers in Photoshop. And to this day, Jeff will still remind me that I'm a kid in diapers in Photoshop. But it's such an amazing, it's a program that's almost, I mean, it's almost a program that allows you to find what it is you want to do and find a new way of using the program. It's pretty close to artificial intelligence in a lot of ways, and how big it's gotten and where you can go with it. And I think any of us that really know Photoshop, I mean, JP and I teaching, we know Photoshop. Can't tell you how many times both of us have come to something like, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, stumbling block, and people looking like, what do you mean you have a stumbling block? It's like, yeah, I have a stumbling block. Oh, 1 second, my fish tank guy's here. Hello. Good. I'm on a meeting.
Yeah, just to think that Photoshop started as a
your email
file
during an
conversion.
automation, Jeff.
What's that, John?
Jeff once did a seminar in Dallas where he was showing actions in automation. And while the action was running, he picked up his email, answered it. One of the people's emails was somebody in the crowd. It was really
funny.
You know, the other day, I think it was Newler who was talking about it, and it's something that Jeff said a long time ago. When, you know, people are still, they want to know what camera you use, what lens you use. Well, I don't know. I use the one that's on my camera. I mean, the cameras and lenses are tools, and you know, even like going to a place like Namibia where the sand's blowing and people, you know, you take your camera out of the case. Well, yeah. What happens if it gets wrecked? Well, it's a tool. I mean, they're going to get wrecked. It's not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But they're simply tools. The real images are the ideas that are the wetwares, I think. The
neurochromes.
And that's what it's really all about. And it's amazing how many people actually think it's, it's what camera and what lens. No, it's not. You know, it's having a vision, and I mean, it really starts with being able to explain what is your vision, what is it that you're trying to convey, what is it that you're set to.
Schewe coined the phrase wetware.
Yeah.
Applications change, hardware changes. They're not changing what's in your head. Wetware. That's Schewe.
I had a good friend who was the head of photography for the Red Cross. And I asked him one day, what's a good camera to buy? And his answer was, one that when it drops, it won't break.
Right.
One that when you leave it on the plane, it finds its way back to you. Right, JP?
Yes.
Jay Maisel used to say he thinks it's a lot easier to be a photographer if you actually carry a camera around.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's half the battle is just being there with a camera and being awake and sober enough to click the shutter.
And with this group and their wine, I don't know.
Yeah, well.
Good thing you didn't do this at 8 p.m.
Yeah. So other folks in the audience, you have other questions or comments you want to make, feel free to unmute and join in the conversation.
Oh, I agree. One of the big points of getting asked how you got that shot, I always tell people, well, you just had to be there.
True.
And be paying enough attention to know to shoot at that moment. You've got to be looking, you've got to be seeing actively.
Especially with abstractions.
Just finding things in there. Is there any images or anything you wanted to share before we end this here?
I think, everyone can go on my website and
I do.
Of course, Jeff has something for us.
Jeff wants to share something.
Well, if you want me to, Seth.
You're going to anyway, so please do, Jeff. You're going to anyway, so please do.
Well, no, okay, so Seth and I and JP, one of the things that we had the real luxury, and you guys all see.
Oh my God.
So one of the things, our first trip was a clusterfuck because we get down to Buenos Aires, and the local pilots went out on strike. We weren't sure we were going to be able to fly from Buenos Aires to Ushuaia, but we ended up getting a 747 because Cork hired the plane because they had a whole bunch of people in Ushuaia trying to get home. So Seth decided he and I were going to be roommates. His big concern was that I was going to be a smoker. And the funny thing is that I quit smoking before I went down to Antarctica, although we both also engaged in heavy use of scopolamine for anti-seasickness, which was a good reason. Here's Seth dividing the buses. Our first trip, we found a wine shop in Ushuaia, and we actually bought wine to take on board the ship. And
You're missing a key part.
The story gets better.
I asked the gentleman to show us the reserve section, and he did. And I said, "We'll take it." He said, "What?" I said, "We'll take the entire reserve section."
But this is now our first trip over. We actually had to sail from Ushuaia to Antarctica. Now Seth and JP are getting old enough that they don't want to do that, and they have the luxury of flying over. Is that correct, Seth?
I don't mind doing it. I would love to do it again, but a lot of people.
This was our first cabin, and quite honestly, we learned to hate this. But we were told not to go out on board, not to leave the cabins if the hatches were dogged. Well, the starboard hatch was dogged, but port side, which is where we were open, and thus began.
Rules are meant for other people.
Yeah. Thus began the legacy of Seth and I and JP and all the photographers getting into trouble because we went on board ship. And this is not fucked up in Photoshop. This is literally about 32 degrees in one direction, 32 in the other. So I, for one reason, here's the three amigos, or the three yellow penguins, and you notice the red life preservers. We have always had to wear the life preservers on board the Zodiacs, and we asked, and they auto-inflate if they hit seawater, and we asked them to explain that, and they said, well, actually, if you get in the water, you got about 3-4 minutes to get out of the water, otherwise you're dead. So we don't call them life preservers. We call them body recovery devices. There's Seth shooting. That's half the battle is just shooting. And then for some reason, Seth developed this 2-arm up, and I've got like 100 shots of Seth with 2 arms up and still shooting and chimping. Our first real interesting night of unbelievable photography was going through the Lemaire Channel, and literally sunset lasted about 3 hours, and Seth climbed the gangway. I'm not sure he was supposed to do that, but he did it anyway. The crow's nest. And then your gloves. Outfitting for Antarctica is a real trip. But we ended up having the sunset, and we're out on board shooting, and Seth is carrying his 300-2.8, and he's going to the bow, he's going to the stern, he's going to the port side, he's going to the starboard side, and he just stopped in the middle. And he said, "This is too much photography." And one guy actually came up to Michael Reichman and said, "This is great. Can we be done now? Can we quit shooting?"
It was 2 o'clock in the morning, as I recall.
Yeah, and Reichman looked at him and said, "No, keep shooting," and he did. This was the beginning of Seth coined the term major giggage, but also major shrinkage, because when you get out in the water, Seth wanted to go out and swim out to touch the iceberg, and he did.
Wow.
and it was cold. And I documented it from shore. Because there's no fucking way I was going to get.
He's never done it yet either.
No,
So,
the gang.
well, there's a comment over in the chat area there. So Seth is telling us questions to ask ourselves about our vision, but he hasn't told us what his answer is for himself. Can you venture a little summary of your vision? And we'll finish up there, I think.
Sure. I set out to enter actually into a space. It's hard to talk and look at these things. Brings back memories. All right, let Jeff finish his little.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was the wine shop. Her name was Mercedes, and I'm still friends with her on Facebook.
Yeah, I know, she is awesome.
And they could not believe how much wine we bought and had to carry it up on board the ship. So keep going, Seth.
I'll wait for you to.
Well,
So I photograph something that I think is essentially invisible to most people, and it's an energy that I feel when now you got to talk about that one, Jeff.
well, okay. So they said the fur seals were territorial, and they act aggressive, but don't worry about it because no problem. They won't actually attack until they actually attack. And you see the scar on my knee. And these are actually photographs by Seth Resnick. I should put copyright Seth Resnick. He documented my treatment for the onboard doctor, who was a great guy.
In his butcher's outfit.
Yeah. So the worst thing, of course, was actually getting the antibiotic shot.
That's my vision right there.
And that the worst thing, of course, was the fact that that meant that I had teeth holes in my knee of my waterproof pants, and that was really what pissed me off the most. Although it's not as bad. And Seth, I didn't put this in there, but I've got pictures of you with the silver gaffers tape in the crotch, trying to repair your waterproof pants. And then you also took an underwater photography down at Nico Harbor. I don't have any of these shots. Another example of Seth going out in the middle of Nico Harbor. And that's ice, folks.
Yes.
The water temperature is probably 34 degrees.
No, it was 28.
It was below freezing?
Yeah, because salt water.
Yeah. And he dunked underneath. And what he said was that the water itself wasn't all that bad, but you can see he's barefoot. And these stones, well, tell him what you said.
The rocks were fucking hard. All right, so can I get back
to your vision?
Yeah.
So I've learned, and I used to say that I was breaking personal space, and as a journalist, that was a really sort of important concept to me, was to get in close and feel one-on-one with the subject. I was actually photographing a rock one day with JP, and I started laughing, saying, well, I'm not exactly breaking this guy's personal space. But I realized, and I changed the word from breaking to entering. And I really feel that when I'm photographing, I'm entering into this personal energy space of whatever the subject is. So the camera sort of becomes an extension of my own subconscious. And the big message that I have is I use metaphor, I use a lot of sensuality, a lot of illusion, with the idea really being to show how fragile this environment is and to prevent it from any further destruction beyond where we already are. That's the general message. And it's interesting because, you know, people want to give you, so are you a wildlife photographer? No, I've done that. Are you a people photographer? I've done that. I was terrified one day when somebody actually said to me, So I was doing a geographic assignment. They said, so, oh, geographic, you must be a wildlife photographer. No, I'm not. Oh, then you're a travel photographer. No, not exactly. Well, the only other thing left is you're a paparazzi. Literally, like, sent a shiver up my back to think, no. But I realized so many of us can't actually explain what it is that we're really chasing. And, so I'm really chasing this invisible energy that I feel. And if I go back to some of my earlier journalism work, the images that still really work for me are these ones where there's, and the word I guess would be relationship, but a real relationship with the subject. And the subject could be a rock. In journalism was typically a person, but it can really be anything. And I know Janet's here too. Photographing abstractions, it's amazing how you can feel connected to a concrete wall or a piece of rust. And you look at it in a way that someone standing next to you wouldn't see. And I guess part of what makes a good image for me is the very idea that if someone's standing next to you, they shouldn't actually see what it is you're photographing. I mean, the idea of, and working next to TV media for so long, my idea was the TV media's, their goal was to bring back exactly what happened, exactly the way you would see it if you were standing there. They also were live, so working for a newspaper, my stuff wasn't going to come out till the next day. My role was to actually reveal what you wouldn't see if you were standing right next to me. And that's sort of been at heart of what I'm still chasing today, is this entire concept of chasing something that you wouldn't see if you were standing next to me. And it really comes down to photographing an energy relationship between myself and a subject. I hope that makes some sense.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank everyone else who's joined us today. We'll be back here on Monday with John Paul. So join us again. Until then, I want everyone to be well.
Thanks.
Any last words from anyone else here?
I do have one last word, and well, no, Seth, I've learned a lot from you. I know you've learned some from me. And the thing about it is, one of the great things about photography is it does not have to be a solo activity. One of the great things is going out with a good friend and exploring and seeing what the other person saw. And one of the fun things was down in your apartment in Florida, where we drank your wine investments. You and JP, we were showing pictures from our first trip to each other. And there was a picture that JP had shot of an iceberg, and Seth had shot the same iceberg. So Seth shot it with a 300, JP shot it with a 14 millimeter. They were both really nice shots. And both of them kind of learned from each other. And then the next trip down to Antarctica, Seth was shooting with a 14 millimeter and JP was shooting with a 100-400.
We actually have a whole
because
lecture
they had learned from each other. And that's one of the great things about these workshops, is you actually get a chance to see what other people see and miss what you didn't see. So it teaches you to see. And that's the great thing about Jay Maisel. He's a great seer. He's a pretty damn good photographer, but he's an even better seer. And I think Seth is a good seer.
Thank you, Jeff.
Cool. Well, thank you. And thank Michael Newler here for putting us all together. He's been a catalyst in some of these things here.
I think this was a lot of fun and really interesting thing to do during this COVID time.
I know. I got bored early in this COVID thing and just started asking people to come on and talk about their photography. So thank you for being part of it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to stop
Thanks,
the
John.
Facebook.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Michael.
And I'm going to stop the recording. So thank you all.